In the spring of 1900, a boat full of Greek sponge divers was driven off course by bad weather. They took shelter beside a barren scrap of rock in the open Aegean, an island called Antikythera. While they waited out the sea, one of the divers went down to look for sponges on the bottom. He was working at around 45 meters. He came back up shaking, and what he described made no sense. Bodies, he said, rotting corpses, horses, arms and legs scattered across the sand in the gloom below. His crewmates assumed the depth had affected him. It hadn't. Every single thing he described was really down there. They were statues, bronze and marble figures, scattered across the wreck of a ship that sank 2,000 years ago. And among the statues lay a shoebox-sized lump of calcified bronze that looked, to everyone, like worthless debris. That lump is the only reason anyone still talks about this shipwreck today. Antikythera sits in the channel between Crete and mainland Greece, on one of the busiest shipping lanes of the ancient world. Cargo ships running west toward Italy had to pass this island. Around the 1st century BC, one of them did not. The coins, the pottery, and the style of the cargo all point to the decades around the middle of that century. Survey work suggests the vessel was unusually large. That fits, because the cargo it carried was extraordinarily valuable. It was loaded with Greek art heading west, the kind of luxury cargo flowing toward wealthy Roman buyers in that period. Recovering it in 1900 was genuinely dangerous. These men wore canvas suits and copper helmets, fed by hand-pumped air. Nobody had properly explained decompression sickness to them. Over the salvage, one diver died, and others were left paralyzed. What they brought up was spectacular. Bronze statues of a quality almost never seen, because bronze was usually melted down and reused. The finds went to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, where the statues took all the attention. The lump sat in a crate. And you can understand why. Beside a life-sized bronze youth recovered whole from the sea, a corroded brick is nothing. Nobody was looking for a machine. Nobody in 1901 had any reason to imagine such a thing could exist. It was catalogued, shelved, and effectively forgotten among thousands of other fragments from the same wreck. In 1902, an archaeologist named Valerios Stais was examining material from the wreck when he looked closely at that lump. The calcified mass had dried out and split open. Inside it, he saw something that should not have existed. A gear wheel, with teeth, precisely cut, evenly spaced, triangular teeth, made to mesh with another wheel. Understand why that was a problem. Trains of toothed wheels transmitting motion at fixed ratios are the foundation of all clockwork. In the accepted history of technology, clockwork this sophisticated appears in Europe in the 14th century after Christ. Not the 2nd century before it. The gap is not decades. It is roughly 1,400 years. And nothing fills that gap. There is no line of simpler geared devices leading up to this one, and none following it. On our timeline of human invention, this object arrives completely alone. So the reaction, for decades, was simply denial. The comfortable explanation was contamination. A far later clock or instrument had been dropped above the site and settled among ancient cargo. That instinct is not unreasonable. Extraordinary claims deserve scrutiny, and archaeologists are right to distrust objects that appear out of time. But the object refused to go away. It was found among the ancient material, locked in the same marine crust. In the 1950s and 60s, a historian of science named Derek de Solla Price began studying it seriously, using gamma radiography. He saw through the corrosion. Behind the first wheel were more wheels, meshed together into a system. There were Greek inscriptions, and there were tooth counts, specific numbers on specific wheels, that encoded known astronomical cycles. Price published this as Gears from the Greeks. Later imaging corrected much of his reconstruction, but the central claim held firm. This was not a clock that had fallen into the sea. It was Greek, it was ancient, and it calculated. He had established the only thing that really mattered. The history of technology had a hole in it. But radiography could only show him shadows. The fragments are dense, layered, and fused solid by 2 millennia of corrosion. Wheels lie behind wheels. Teeth are hidden under crust. Much of what he reconstructed would later turn out to be wrong. So picture the room where this was built, somewhere in the Greek world around the 2nd century before Christ. No powered lathe, no milling machine, no micrometer, a bench, hand tools, files, an oil lamp, and sheet bronze. Every tooth on every wheel had to be marked out and cut by hand, one at a time. And they could not be approximate. The entire function depends on the ratio between the tooth counts of meshing wheels. Get a count wrong, and the machine does not merely run badly. It calculates the wrong sky. Some of these wheels carry more than 200 teeth, cut in bronze, at a scale you could hold in your palm. And the wheels had to be stacked, layered on shared axles, meshing across levels inside a case the size of a large book. Every wheel had to clear its neighbors, turn freely, and stay aligned. This is watchmaking, centuries before the word existed. And that is only the manufacturing. Before anyone cut a tooth, somebody had to do the astronomy. They needed the length of the lunar month to several decimal places and the long cycles on which eclipses repeat. Then all of it had to be translated into whole numbers of gear teeth that a craftsman could physically make. That is a collaboration between an astronomer and an engineer, and it feels startlingly modern as a division of labor. Who they were, we do not know. The mechanism carries no maker's name anywhere on it. Rhodes is a popular suggestion because it was a center of astronomy and the home of Hipparchus, whose lunar theory it appears to embody. Others argue for Corinth, or for a tradition descending from Archimedes and Syracuse. All of it is inference. Anyone who tells you confidently which workshop built this is going well beyond what the evidence can actually support. The same caution applies to the date. Most estimates cluster in the 2nd century before Christ. But serious arguments have been made for both earlier and later. These are not evasions. They are the honest state of a field working from 82 corroded fragments and no surviving documentation whatsoever. The real breakthrough came a full century after the discovery, and it required a genuinely absurd piece of equipment. By 2005, researchers wanted to see the internal structure properly, layer by layer, rather than reading shadows on a plate. No portable machine could do it, so one was built and transported to Athens. It weighed 8 tons. An 8-ton scanner moved across Europe to look inside an object you could comfortably hold in 2 hands. It worked. The scans resolved the gearing in 3 dimensions and let researchers count teeth on wheels nobody had ever seen. 82 fragments survive. 30 gears have been identified within them. Nobody believes that is all there ever were. Reconstructions propose a good many more, driving displays that have not survived at all. How many is still argued over. Some reconstructions model all 5 planets known to the Greeks. That remains a proposal built on inference, not a settled reading. The imaging also recovered the writing. Thousands of Greek characters, hidden under corrosion for 2,000 years. And the text is not decoration. It explains what the dials show and how to read them. It is, in the most literal sense, a user manual, which tells you something quietly important. You do not write instructions for a device only its maker will ever touch. This was made to be handed over. From all of this, the function became clear. You turned a crank on the side of the box. The front showed the positions of the sun and moon against the zodiac, with a small sphere displaying the moon's phase. On the back, spiral dials tracked the great repeating cycles of Greek astronomy across many years at a time. One of them followed the cycle on which eclipses repeat, so the machine could tell you when to expect one. For most of human history, an eclipse was terror or an omen. Here was a bronze box that simply predicted it. And according to the inscriptions, the dials indicated something of what to expect when the eclipse arrived. That is the sky itself, reduced to a machine you could hold on a table and turn with your hand. And then there is the detail that genuinely stops engineers. The moon does not cross our sky at constant speed. It runs faster at some points in its orbit and slower at others. The mechanism reproduces that variation. A pin on one wheel rides in a slot on another, the two mounted slightly off-center from each other. As they turn, the output speeds up and slows down. An astronomical theory, built as a moving machine. Think about what that requires. Somebody first had to notice the moon's speed varies, and then measure it accurately. Then somebody had to express that irregularity as geometry. Then somebody had to build the geometry out of metal. Every one of those steps is difficult. Doing all 3 in sequence is what makes this object extraordinary. Which leaves the question everybody asks. If the Greeks could do this 2,000 years ago, why did nothing follow? The dramatic answer is that Rome conquered the Greek world and crushed the tradition. I don't think that survives scrutiny. Cicero, a Roman writing in the 1st century before Christ, describes geared astronomical devices in his own work. He mentions one attributed to Archimedes and another made by Posidonius. He calls them remarkable, but not impossible. That changes the picture. It suggests this was not a freak one-off, but a surviving example of a real tradition. Which means what was lost was never a secret formula. What was lost was the chain. The workshops, the apprenticeships, the accumulated hand skill, held by a tiny community who could do both the astronomy and the metal. Traditions like that are fragile. They live in a handful of workshops and a handful of heads. They do not need conquest to end them. They only need to stop being taught for a generation or two. Bronze gets melted down for its metal, manuscripts rot, and skill that lives only in hands vanishes silently. A technology that genuinely existed becomes literally unbelievable to the people who come afterwards. That is how knowledge actually dies, not in a fire, or a sacking, or a single dramatic catastrophe. It dies when the last person who knows how to do it has nobody left to teach. That is the part one find genuinely unsettling. Not that the Greeks built a calculating machine 2,000 years ago, but that when we finally found it, our very first instinct was to insist that it could not possibly be theirs. We were so certain we knew what they were capable of that the object itself had to be the mistake. It lay on the seabed for 2,000 years, and in a museum crate for 2 more, before anyone would see it clearly. Which raises a genuinely uncomfortable question about everything else we are still quite sure the ancient world could not do.